everyone. Welcome to this Future Film Labs Special Editors Edition. Thank you so much for coming. My name's Evelyn. I work in the Future Film team here at the BFI, and I'm really excited that we've got such a great panel and a really exciting masterclass later for you as well. Just to give you an idea of how today is going to go, so we're going to have a panel discussion and Q&A from these guys in just a sec. And then after that, we'll be showing you a short film, 10-minute short film, which is a BFI Network Short of the Month. And then we'll have a short break before masterclass at 2 o'clock. Yes, 2 o'clock. And then following the masterclass, we'll be having some networking drinks in the Blue Room. So stick around so that you can have a mingle, a free drink on us, make some friends, maybe find some future collaborators to work on a future film with. Who knows? But for now, I'm going to pass over to the wonderful Rihanna Dillon. Thank you.
Thanks, Evelyn. Thank you all so much for coming. It's lovely to see so many of you in the audience. So let's start then by introducing our wonderful panel. We have Greg Loftin and Rory Cantwell. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi.
Perhaps we could start with just you telling us a little bit about what you do. Greg, let's start with you.
Hello, I'm Greg Loftin, and I'm a course leader for a undergraduate program, a BA Honours Editing and Post-Production program at Ravensbourne University. I've always been around editing. I love it. I think it's a kind of magic. I recently have finished a piece of quite heavy-duty research, which has ended up as a book, which is called Writing for the Cut, What Screenwriters Can Learn from Film Editors About Storytelling. Just saying.
Thank you, Rory.
Hi, I'll sit forward. Hi, I'm an editor. I've been editing for sort of over 30 years in lots of different niches. I was a founding partner of Soho Editors, which is a talent agency for freelance post-production talent across all the sort of different technology and tool set. And it's a training centre for all the manufacturers as well. So, but personally, I've been editing whilst my brother runs that company. So I get to play with all the pictures whilst he gets to do all the real work. So yeah, that's what I do. And I'm a colourist as well as editor because things are converging. So, yeah.
We'll definitely get onto that in a bit. Yeah. And just an apology, unfortunately, you can see Maya was supposed to join us, but she can't make it. But we'll forge on without her. So tell us how you got started in the industry. You know, what inspired you to become an editor? Did you know that was a real job when you were, watching films back in the day?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I did a degree in film and drama back in the day when there were very few of those. And then got out and walked up Wardour Street with my CV and just walked in every door and went, give us a job, give us a job. Because then it was very, localised where the business was. It's not so much now. And then eventually someone went, yeah, right. And then so basically after that, I didn't know whether I wanted to be an editor particularly, but I had access to both camera and editing in this environment. So I basically just sneaked into the edit suite whenever the boss went home.
That's a good tip.
And just learnt it. I would sleep on the couch and then get out and make the suite again and leg it out of the room.
Wow.
and walk back in pretending like I was just arriving at work the next day again. And I carried on doing that until I'd learnt it. And that's how I became an editor.
Was it celluloid or tape back then?
This was tape.
Yeah.
This was very disgustingly horrible tape. God, you guys are lucky. Just to avoid that historical moment where just to paint a picture, every edit was, I'll mark in where I'd like it, mark in where I'd like it, mark in where I'd like it, hit the button, sit back and wait for everything to happen, and I can do another edit.
Oh, gosh.
Literally painful as hell. And then if you wanted to change your mind in tape, you were screwed. That was it. It was all over. So yeah, I mean, we've moved.
Let's not go there.
Let's not go
that
there.
Sounds
Technology
terrifying.
has played to a point where you guys are in a utopian space at the moment, whether you're aware of it or not. Certainly, if you've got the historical context I've got, definitely. The world is utopian now.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I came to editing, and we've just introduced ourselves to you, and I just wondered, it would be interesting to know in the audience here who you are. I mean, not one at a time, but just to know a little bit about, you know, where you're coming from. So you can put your hands up multiple times, but how many in the audience are editors or like to edit? I mean, you don't have to say, yeah. So you that's a
right
huge
place.
number. How many of you in the audience are screenwriters? I mean, who like to write stories? Yeah, cool. How many of you edit and write screen stories? Good. How many of you are directors and storytellers, that kind of thing? Yeah, cool. Editing, in a way, informs everything. I just wanted to say that. So we're in a room full of filmmakers, and so, you know, the specialism here is editing. But in a sense, editing is at the heart of everything that we do in filmmaking. Screen stories are about editing. There is this. There's a great documentary that you can see on YouTube called, it sounds kind of cheesy, The Magic of Movie Editing. Has anyone seen this thing? Okay, so, you know, this is your homework afterwards. It's a fantastic documentary, and it's the best documentary that's ever been made, even though it's maybe a little antique. It's probably about 10 years old now, because it really gives you an insight view of what editors do. So check it out. It is absolutely brilliant. But in that documentary, someone just says this very simple thing, you know, what makes a movie is the editing. And that struck me as something quite profound, but it's true. You know, otherwise you've just got rushes, okay? You know, and the editing is not a plumbing job. It is how you tell the story. So my earliest brush with this kind of magic, and I really think of editing as a kind of alchemy, a kind of magic, is when I was studying film, and way back in the day when I was a student, and we were looking at the Soviet cinema. The Russians are coming. And so this was all about Eisenstein and Kuleshov and Man with a Movie Camera and the Kuleshov effect and all of that kind of stuff. And it just blew my socks off. You know, this is a time of silent movie making where the cut really did tell the story, you know. It just, you know, that was the beginning of my love affair.
Certainly, when you're as the editor, you get presented with finite material. It's like at the beginning of the process, it's an infinite possibilities. You've got a blank page, you can put anything on it. But the editor's lot is not that. The editor's got finite problems in every single part of the origination of that media. And your job is to, you know, alchemy, to lift the gold out of that mud. Try and find that essence, the story. It might be that you have to tell the story differently. It might be that you have to tell a different story because you haven't got the story you want. You know, there's 1,000 things that all become very real, as you were saying earlier. It's like the moment of reality happens in the edit suite. Up until then, it's fantasy football. And crossing your fingers.
There's that very, like, you know, there's that well-known saying that you can't see good editing. Can you break that down for us, and do you agree with that?
Totally.
So that's a kind of yes/no answer. So the fact is, of course, that editing is famously described as the invisible craft. And it wants to be invisible for the most part. Sometimes it doesn't, but mostly it wants to be invisible because the point about editing is that it wants you to enjoy the content without being snagged on the construction. So editing is all about construction, but it's invisible construction. So if you're seeing the edits, it's either a bad editor at work, or the editor wants you to see it. It's a disruptive part of the storytelling. So sometimes, if you're looking at, you know, an obvious example would be a jump cut. I'm guessing most of you guys will know what a jump cut looks like. It's to draw attention to that moment, and it could be that through that jump cut, the intention is to create some kind of shock, or some kind of trauma effect, or some kind of, oh, I just woke up moment. So when intended, you know, the cut can be as visible as you like.
There's, I mean, I don't know if I'm alone in thinking there are like some flashy editors, for example, like Hank Corvin comes to mind, who works a lot with Adam McKay, and it feels like the editing is supposed to be very, very visible. So how do you feel about films like that?
Well, for me, it's like your personality should not be part of the film. That's, it's about, it lives and breathes outside of your experience. It has to make everybody cry or laugh at the same time for all the right reasons. It's that sort of process. But it should, apart from those moments where you're using it as a device to, like flip the camera or breaking the line and all those sorts of things can disrupt the viewer and for a purpose. Most of the time it's the editor is an effaced part of the process. You're supposed to be invisible. You're steering people's point of view and controlling their narrative exposition and saying, there's the knife on the floor, you know about that, all the characters in the room don't, this is where I'm taking you. But you should never really see it. And it's the same across all the other, quite a few of the other disciplines, obviously all of them.
Yeah.
Like, you're not supposed to notice an effect shot, you're not supposed to notice the audio mix taking you to another emotional state. You're not supposed to notice the colour manipulating where you're looking in the shot, where you've got this wide landscape, but you've got to be looking there if you're going to get the story. And that's the colorist storytelling part. So they all cross over, but they're all about letting you drink in the narrative and never go, hold on, I'm back in reality now.
Yeah. Well, now you mentioned colorists, let's go into that, because editing seems to be such a broad umbrella now. And like you were saying, so many different jobs sort of converge within editing. So can you break down some of the other areas that you guys work on, like, colorist, grading, etc.? Tell us a bit about that.
I'll just say a little bit, and then, because I just want to pick up on the thing about whether you should see or you shouldn't see the edit, because I take a slightly different view in that sometimes the story is written precisely to foreground to show off the toys, right? And increasingly now, because we have this galaxy of digital tools that we can play with, they become part of the fabric of the storytelling. So it's probably not a good example. The one you gave is probably a good example. And Guy Ritchie, for example, I know writes for post-production Hoopla. And Hoopla is great. It's entertaining. It's fun. It is magic, right? So we enjoy it when we get these kind of slow-mo motions where, things are reversed, things are flipped, where there's kind of visual effects, and it's kind of, self-consciously done. And it's a different level of pleasure. I mean, one of the things, ultimately you come down to is, I think the origins, in a sense, of editing is the fairground. I mean, editing is a kind of fairground ride. Film is a fairground ride. And sometimes, you want to be aware of the kind of machine that you're on, and other times you just want to be a pure, sublime rush. As for the question about the kind of remit or the umbrella, not so much of editing. I mean, editing is always editing, but the fact is post-production, where editing sits as a really core dimension of what goes on after the shoot. You have these other sister crafts that are also part of the storytelling. So color grading, just again, by show of hands, how many of you guys have played around with any kind of grading software? That's cool. How many of you have played around with DaVinci Resolve? Yeah. Or with, I don't know, any other grading? Anyone else mention other grading software they've played with?
That's interesting.
Yeah?
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's really cool.
That was Baselight.
So did you download the student version, or you working with?
Oh, it's our university. We have
Okay. Cool. Can I just ask what your university is? Okay, come to Ravensbourne. That's all I'm saying. Also, the rest of you buy my book. All right.
Sorry.
So Baselight is one of these big global players for grading. It's a beautiful piece of kit. So grading, which is all about the look and mood of the piece, and it's part of the storytelling. And then sound design, which is a huge area we can talk about. How many of you guys use Audition or Pro Tools or anything like that? Yeah. So yeah. And then visual effects, which is about as big as a planet. How many people are using like After Effects or Nuke or any? Yeah. Hands up who's doing any kind of visual effects. Yeah, some of that. Yeah, I mean, all of these areas have expanded out of all recognition. When we set up our course in year around about 2000, we were editing on tape, and we had, very few people even had access to the kit. And grading was still something done, with film, like with celluloid. And visual effects was very early days, and there was hardly any kit around. Nowadays, the world has completely changed, and where all of these, what you might call boutique crafts, grading, visual effects, sound design, and so on, were only for the high-end products, like the multi-million feature film or the advert. Now, daytime TV is graded, right? And everything has a look. And what used to be expensive high-end is now standard.
And it's accessible, because clearly you guys can get to Resolve and download it tomorrow, and you've got actually all of those tools in one solution now. So, and all of those disciplines interacting with each other. And for me, if you're filmmaking, it's a holistic process. It's not about knowing one discipline. Oh, I do the typing here and then I give it on to someone else. The more you're aware of the pre-production, production, post-production process and have an overview of the disciplines within it, you're going to make much better decisions. You're going to be more informed. You're going to save money just by knowing the consequences of a call at that stage or that stage. It's about getting that overview. You've got to do that. And I would say that that's about saying, I might not want to be an effects compositor, but I've got to know about what they're doing in that space. I've got to have the language that they use so I can communicate my ideas properly, and I have to have an understanding of what's done in that space, even if I'm not going to get involved myself. I need, as a director, as a writer, you need to know the potential so that you can exploit it.
Yeah.
So, that's get the cover, get the understanding of the process from beginning to end is your mission one.
I know that you both do teach courses about editing, but objectively speaking, if you weren't going to plug your own courses, do people need to take a course? Could they learn it at home watching YouTube videos, or do you think, actually, no, you will be better off in the long term if you take a course?
I've done both. I've done that, I've done the brutal throw yourself on the sword, let's just mud dwell for a month until I've worked out what's going on, and then I'll climb out and I'll have loads of questions I now know I need the answer to,
right,
which is stage one of any learning curve. But it's far less painful. If you shortcut the pain, I was saying in my presentation later on that, every learning curve has a pit of despair. And that's whether you've got a mobile phone or a new piece of software. It's just how quickly you deal with the pit. For me, you throw yourself into the pit, you expose yourself to all the questions, and once you own those questions, you're climbing out of the pit, and you never go back there again. So how shallow the pit is determined by how quickly and how you approach it, whether you're determined to get through it or not, and possibly by cutting down the pain by going to someone who already knows it and learning through that experience. Both are valid. One's faster than the other and less painful.
Yeah, fair.
So,
Editing, like everything around film, is, relatively speaking, a recent craft, right? It's only about 100 years old, or a bit longer than that. At the very beginning, no one cut. At the beginning, we were just recording an event, and then you ran out of film, and that was it. And that was special in its own right. With the invention of editing, when people started to think, well, we could do something, we could cut this up and putting this thing in, put these together, see what that happens. Oh, juxtaposition. Wow, this is crazy stuff. Then we started to get storytelling. So editing was the beginning of storytelling for film. Before that, it was just a recording medium, like a documentary medium in that sense. And nadays, nearly everyone in the room edits. They can edit. They communicate through editing. Everyone's got their YouTube and Vimeo account, Snapchat, and everyone's cutting content. And they're not going anywhere to learn this. It's a bit like word processing, in a sense. No one, you would not seriously think about spending any time with someone, how does word processing work? You just do it because it's an available technology, it's an available software, and you pick it up and you just see what works. And, that's how editing was right from the very beginning. Let's see what works. So there's two sides to this. One is software training. And for editing, really, most software nowadays is fairly intuitive so that you could, first of all, some of it's free, clearly. And it's fairly intuitive, so you can get stuck in fairly easily and cut stuff. But the other thing is you've got online tutorials coming out of your ears, so you can go anywhere to find out how to do it. The more difficult thing, so clearly learning the software does not constitute having a craft. That's a big difference. So you can have the software and you can fool around with your brushes and you can create some great stuff, some cool stuff. And if you keep working away at it, and particularly if you've got a critical mind, a critical eye, and you're looking at how things work, and you push your face up close to the screen and look at things forensically, you will raise the bar for yourself. But a far better idea is to come to Ravensbourne. And, because
Did you know that he teaches a course there? Has he mentioned?
No, but all I was going to say is to get yourself off to masterclasses, around, so listen to the people who talk about their craft. So this is not about software. This is about how the cut tells the story. And that's something that they can show you how this magic really, really works.
Well, luckily, we're all going to be sticking around for your masterclass later.
I'll be trying to show you some magic. For me, it's when you're editing, in terms of storytelling, I think a good analogy to think about is that every shot is a word in that sentence. You're building a sentence. You can make something that's poetic and makes everybody cry, or you can make something Dadaist that confuses the hell out of everyone. It's literally that simple. What order they're in, and then it's about, you're going to take it further. It's about putting the right apostrophes in the right pauses, the right balance, getting the rhythm, the pattern of it into the phrase as well. And if you get all that working, you do create a coherence that everybody moves with together. And so, that's the gold you're trying to pull out of the essence. And it might be 2 frames on the end of one shot that changes the complete meaning of everything.
Yeah.
That's the mad thing. It's like if you've got one guy going, "You did that," and the other one immediately goes, "No, I didn't." "You did that." "No, I didn't." That has a different meaning to "You did that." "No, I didn't." Just a little pause in between, and suddenly the psychology of what's happening on either side of that debate is changed. That's the power of the editing.
There's a great quote from Spielberg about cutting jaws. I don't know if you heard this thing. So this is also in the magic of movie editing, where he's talking about trying to cut jaws so it looked really, really scary. And the editor was all about cutting things much, much shorter. They had an animatronic shark, right? This is before really big visual effects had taken off. So they had this big animatronic shark in the water.
Is it called Bruce, that shark?
Is that right? Yeah. And so, Spielberg had spent a lot of time on a barge out there with this big plastic shark, He wanted, because he wanted value out of this thing, so he wanted more shark in there, but the editor was saying, no, you cut it short. So he said, but, and they're getting to this argument with the editor about, I just wanted you to expand it. And she's saying, no, 2 frames off. And he said, no, 2 frames. He said, that 2 frames was the difference. Ultimately, the difference between something really, really scary and a big white plastic turd.
Well, that's really interesting.
That is perfect. That is exactly the difference.
Yeah.
I was wanting to talk to you then about that sort of special. Everyone, knows that a director has quite a special relationship with their editor because ultimately it comes down to sort of those two in a room together.
Yeah.
So tell me about that then, sort of forging that relationship, and what happens if you do disagree with the director on something? Are you kind of well placed enough that you can put your opinion?
It's different roles.
Forward.
It depends what sector of the business you're in and what role you're providing. Sometimes you're a button
And how well you
pusher.
know the director
Yeah.
as well, yeah.
Sometimes you're providing a service to 10 people in the room all fighting with different creative ideas.
Right.
And sometimes you're sitting there and you're bonding with a guy and you're getting on with it, or a woman, and you're getting on with it for a couple of months, whittling the thing into shape. It's a mixed bag on that.
One of the things they say about editors is that ultimately it's a bit like they're diplomats at the United Nations, right? That the thing about editors is that they are sometimes called humble backroom folk, but actually they are very cunning people. Because, you know, they're very often, particularly for feature films, they're working with huge egos in the room, you know. And what they're doing is they're quietly winning their way, right? So what happens is that you have a discussion and the director's saying, you know, is micromanaging the edit, right? Which no editor likes, you know. And the editor wants to be saying, get the hell out of the room until I finish this sequence. But they're telling the editor how to do the job. And one of the things that editors tend to do then is to say, well, look, I'll do it your way. All right, actually, just step out for 10 minutes. I'm going to do that cut, and I'll show you. And they'll do 2 or 3 different versions. And then the director then can make a choice between the different cuts that they're seeing. And the fact is, those 3 versions will suggest quite different things, and things that the director could not possibly have known. Because the fact is, although some people sometimes think of editing as a kind of jigsaw puzzle, you know, it is up to a degree, but then you'd have to say, yeah, but it doesn't make the picture on the box, right? Because any and every editor will come up with quite a different story every time from the same jigsaw pieces. And so just at that kind of micro level of, you know, a short sequence, you could come up with, I don't know, maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 different versions of that. And each one will be signaling quite a different story, a different kind of subtext. Because actually a lot of what goes on with the cut is around subtext, about generating ideas or sparking ideas in the minds of the viewer. And that's the beauty of the craft.
I mean, I've had brutal experiences with clients where you know that they're making the wrong call. You try every technique you can, every option to get them to make the right part. You're part counsellor in the room. You're part therapist. You're part, you know, you're doing a lot of roles while you're sitting there keeping that client on the path to and delivering managing expectations from what you're seeing, where you can take it. But yeah, I had one experience where the director insisted on a very brutally horrible shot going into the trailer. And I argued, but you can only argue in certain roles as well. If you're in that kind of workflow, you can argue, but again, if you try and argue when you've got 10 agency creators behind you, you'll get beaten up. So, but I had a chance to argue the case in this one, and I said, that's wrong. And he insisted that it went in. And it made me want to break off the job, because at that point I was like, you're going to insist I put a lot of really bad ideas into this. Yeah. Do I really want to be involved in it? So, and then the exec producer came in and went, what is that shot doing in there?
You were vindicated.
I just chuckled. You can see my shoulders going up and down as the guy went, no, it's staying in. And I was like, no.
So you're crying on the inside.
Yeah, I was just resigning on the inside slowly.
I don't know if any of you have seen Fosama yet, but Simon McMahon, who just won a Best Editing BFI for Fosama, said that he started out editing people's wedding videos. So is it like air miles? You know, doing your time? Where do you recommend starting? Should you go straight into film if that's what you're interested in, or should you kind of mess around with people's wedding videos?
I think that, I mean, if my view is it's all good. I mean, it's all good. What you want to be doing is you want to be... The thing about editing is that only rarely do you finally say, I'm a specialist, I only do feature films. Because you couldn't really make a living that way. So what you need to do is you need to be across different genres, different platforms, different length, long form, short form. And you just want to be good at storytelling. You just want to fall in love with this craft, even if, you know, whether it's documentary or it's a short film or it's an advert or a pop promo, and you just need to be working with stuff all the time. And don't just wait for the gig to show up. Download rushes, enter competitions. There's a lot of great found footage out there that you can use and work with, and just keep working it. Create show reels for yourself, do movie trailers, so, you know, go watch download a movie and cut it, make a trailer for yourself. One of my students recently now is absolutely flying in his career because he was in love with making film trailers, right? So he used to download footage, cut stuff up, and he was, I can't remember where he put it, on Vimeo, and he was found, he was spotted, and it was like a talent scout, and he was called in, and now he works at this huge trailer company called Ignition, and he's working in California now. There are so many different ways into this profession, but you just need to be across it and making it and doing it all the time.
I mean, you literally do need to bake in the understanding of pictures. So that's about doing the process over and over again, asking the same question and maybe coming up with a different way of solving the problem. But it is exposure and drilling it in, then you learn the language and you learn how to do it quickly as well. You know what will work or what won't before you even do anything.
Yeah. I'll just say on the back of that, because you're talking about how in a sense, you do it over and over again, but this is a defining characteristic of the craft of editing, which is that it's an endlessly iterative process. People often say that the editor never really finishes the job, they just take it away from him. And I kind of get that, Yeah. So, but the other part of that thing about the different iterations is that you need to be showing it to people. It's pointless you doing it on your own. If you think that the professional model for editing is that you're working with a client, then it's clearly pointless, if you're just working through stuff and it's just for yourself. If you're not showing it and getting objective feedback from people, you're not going to move on. So you really ought to be looking at getting yourself into that great position where you can show edits to a circle of friends who are also editing, and you give each other mutual feedback. That kind of thing is really going to help.
I think we should turn over to the audience now. So if anybody's got a question, please put your hand up. And I think we've got a roving mic somewhere. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, stick your hand up. Oh, yeah.
One or two.
We've got one here and then one over here
And one over.
afterwards.
Hi. I'm kind of curious to know, how do you get used to the many styles and the many techniques of editing through both software and technology?
Like different genres or?
Different genres, as well as how do you get used to all the technology used? Because you can always specialize in one style of editing software, but then if you're told to use something else, how do you get used to it?
Once you've learnt editing, the principles, the fundamentals of the process don't really change between software. Once you know three-point editing, you know three-point editing. That's how you control how clips get into the timeline. And that works universally across all of them. So the language sits above the technology you're using, really, and it's how you filter it into the technology, what it allows you to do with that. But basically, the process is still the same.
The second part of that, the language thing, which is separate from the technology, is the craft, right? So obviously, there's not going to be a single answer to this. But what I'd say is that there is a grammar to the cut. It is a kind of language. There isn't a formal notation like there is for music, but there is a structure, a structuring principle that underlies the cut. And that structuring principle is a kind of language, is a communication, and it will be differently inflected depending on whether it's a horror or a thriller or a documentary or whatever. And the way to detect that is, it's a bit like if you want to be if you want to be a screenwriter, you need to read, lots and lots of published screenplays. You need to be doing it all the time. For editing, it's different and it's slightly harder. But here's a little tip for you. What I do for my students is I get them to import film clips into an editing package and to reverse engineer that sequence so that you ultimately are looking at the cut that the editor looked at when the editor finished the cut. And there is a map, an anatomy of the film. And you can, once you start to break it down, you can see the structure. And this is about pacing and timing, and it's about, where this sequence finishes, where this paragraph finishes, and the next one begins, where it goes fast, where it goes fast, fast, quick, quick, slow. And you start to pick up the rhythm of this thing, and you understand that this is actually how a suspense sequence works. And actually, there are almost universal truths about sequences, for suspense sequences, that you'll find across all films. So the code starts to become revealed to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
longer than you probably wanted that.
Oh, that was great.
No, I thought it was good.
And we've got one here, and then one in the middle after that, yeah.
Hiya, I'm currently editing a short film for college, and I was just going to ask, what's the biggest mistake you see when young people start colour grading? Like, what mistakes do you see happen?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, essentially with colour correction, the biggest mistake everybody makes is they try and achieve the technical balance on the shot and the look part of the shot all in one go. And that's immediately, not only are you digging yourself a big hole to fall into, but you'll find it very difficult to do the next shot and the next shot, and to get coherence of the look across everything, because that is a challenge. But my methodology when I'm training people is say do it as two processes. Always think of colour correction as two processes. The first process is getting a technical grade together, making sure your white is pure in that shot, your black is pure in that shot, your skin tones are sitting in the right space. If you do that shot by shot by shot, you're leveling out all the media. Then you can develop the look across that, and if you've done that bit right, you should sustain the look across that bit. So think of it as two completely independent processes, getting it even and neutral, like you normalise your audio to a standard of dB. Same with colours. Do the same with colours, and then put the look on top, and it will work much better.
Thanks. Yes, somebody put your hand up. Yeah.
Okay, so there's, as you said, a wealth of software and plugins and all sorts of stuff going on at the moment in the industry. So I'm just kind of interested, and I do appreciate that there are specialists in particular fields when it comes to workflow and colour and all those sorts of things. But are there any kind of favourites or bests as far as packages are concerned that you particularly like?
For me, I mean, so I'll step back a little bit. For me personally, I'm a bit of an edit whore. I'll dive on anything and play with it until
Can I quote you on that? Edit.
it's broken me or I've broken it. I'm a bit of I have geek experiences that I have to deal with. But back from my agency's point of view, there are definitely sections where different technology has different strengths. Avid for drama. Yeah, if you want to be a film cutter, you've got to learn Avid. That's pretty much the deal.
Or you want to work in a post house.
Yeah.
So if your ambitions were to work, so it's a bit like going back to your question earlier on about, destination, starting off as cutting wedding videos. Ultimately, do you want to be a freelance, or do you want to work at a facility house? Now, if you're working at a facility house and you're interested in editing, then you'd really have to be on top of Avid, because there's nothing else that really works like Avid. Because it's a system, it has a back end to it. It has a server. Several people can be editing the same program at the same time. It just works differently from Premiere. I mean, the top software that that the industry uses, and you'd want to be doing that, is Avid and Premiere for editing, and for grading it is DaVinci Resolve, and it is Baselight, really, and for audio it's Pro Tools and Audition, I guess. Would you say that?
Yeah, totally. No, that's the industry standard.
The reason, it's not just because they're better than all the other, because there's other great software out there. It's because if you're, because one thinks of editing as something you just do on your own, maybe in your front room, but the edit doesn't often, in a professional sense, just stay on your laptop. Very often it's going to end up in a post house or somewhere else, another facility. So you need to be using software that trades with other software. That's one of the reasons, yeah.
And there's also the thing about, as I say, if you're in Premiere, then you might need to know Premiere and After Effects. It's not just about learning that one niche thing, because, certainly from the agency point of view, that's what we get requests for. We don't get a request for a Premiere boy, or a girl. We get an asked for someone who can do After Effects, bit of Photoshop, Premiere, and it could be multiple different, in each different manufacturer we get those sorts of different niche requests for skills. So, but obviously the more skills you have, the more jobs you can take in that formula, and obviously the more understanding you can put to every part of that job. that's why I'm saying it's like nowadays more than ever it's about getting that holistic overview rather than just saying
Just
I'm
saying,
going to
an
learn
editor.
that.
Yeah. You can't say that anymore professionally. You can't say, all I do is edit, because the client would just be expecting you to be able to do visual effects, motion graphics, some sound design, and all the rest of it. You have to be across most of those things. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to know enough.
You have to be able to talk to the people who are the
Yeah.
experts and be able to communicate properly with them exactly what's gone on, and be able to take it to a level where it's workable. You know, I would never claim to be a guy who could knock out a 7.1 surround sound mix, but I've got to be able to do a decent audio mix that everybody can go, oh yeah, that feels like it's all good. You know, you know, that's the
Interesting.
benchmark of entry level
Yeah.
for, you've got to be able to tick those entry level levels on all the disciplines in the craft, and then you're safe on all of them.
Any more questions? Yes. Just up there.
Oh, this is weird. Bit of a cheesy question, perhaps. Do you have any editors of films that you've seen recently where the edit like really jumped out to you or thought, oh, that was like so well done, or anything? Like, especially like, I'm just more interested in, I think, like the recent maybe developments or things that you personally just found really interesting.
My personal experience, I was lucky enough to interview some editors, do your job on another stage,
Hey.
and I got to talk to the guy who edited Baby Driver.
Oh, cool.
And that for me was one of the, you know, if you're going to get, that's an emotional job for an editor. I mean, what a joy, what a pleasure.
No, it's Eddie Hamilton.
Yeah, no, it was, I can't remember his name.
Anyone know?
Paul
There you
Mackis,
go.
yeah,
I
it's
knew you'd
Paul
know.
Mackis, yeah.
And basically, one of the things that was brilliant about why it's such a seminal editing film is he actually edited it on set as they were shooting it because of the you know, way they wanted to bond it with the music, and everybody was being fed the music sync. It's a tour de force in editing terms, just for that meticulous nature, and also fascinating on the level of merging editing, post-production, joining up with production and becoming a concurrent process was, you know, that's something I can see certainly happening more and more. There's less and less reason for these very formulaic break. You know, it's going to cross over and converge. You know, you could be starting offlining, roughing out your edit as you're shooting it, and then you'll see that you need another cutaway down there. You'll see that you don't need to set up the lighting differently now. You'll save money from doing that process concurrently. Maybe. Maybe not. That's qualified. So.
The research I did for my book, did I mention it? Got me to interview, I was interviewing just some of the best film editors around, and they were ones that I was particularly interested in. So I got to, so how many of you guys in the room know Walter Murch?
I was wondering when his name was going to pop up.
Okay, so Walter Murch is a legend, and he's also written a book which, you know, if you're interested in editing, you know, is like a real primer, which is called In the Blink of an Eye. So Walter Murch is someone whose thoughts around editing, I think in particular, are just extraordinary. But in terms of sit up and I really want to talk to this person, I'm fascinated. A French editor whose name is Juliette Welfling, and she edits a lot of the films by a film director called Audiard. And she edited, for example, The Butterfly and the Diving Bell. I don't know if any of you have seen that. And Un Prophète, a prophet. And there is something about the way that she cuts where you can almost see a signature. And actually, you don't often see that because editors are not supposed to have signatures. But partly because she works with artists. I mean, you know, filmmaker, director, artists. You can see that they've, in a sense, allowed her a kind of signature in the way that she tells stories. The one other thing, I can't remember his name exactly, but if you want to see some bravura editing, have a look at the opening sequence of City of God. City of God, yeah.
Yes.
How many of you guys know this film? Wow, yeah. Look at that opening sequence again. That is just a magical editing sequence, and it has all of the, if you like, the tricks and the magic of editing about it.
I think you showed that
Yeah.
last time you were
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
and you showed it sort of with the script.
Yeah, exactly.
Side by side.
So it was written in that way. Yeah.
That was brilliant. Unfortunately, that is all that we have time
Oh.
for. But obviously, Rory is going to be giving his masterclass later. You'll be sticking around, so if you've got any more questions, I'm sure you'll be happy to answer them then. But for now, I would like to introduce the BFI Network Short of the Month called His Wake. Really excited to be seeing that with everybody. And one last time, please give it up for Greg and Rory. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Heather.